Please join me in the book of Job this morning. Our message that I've been assigned is called The Man Who Contended with God. We want to see what that's all about. I've discovered as I've gotten older, and I'm now officially old, that I get more sentimental. When I was much younger, I served under an eldership where one of the elders, it seemed like almost at the drop of a hat, he would start crying. Almost everything would bring tears to his eyes, and sometimes far more than just to his eyes. And I find I'm getting to that point in my life now that I'm approaching about the same age that he was. So I was thinking last night that about 49 years ago, last week, I was sitting where you're sitting. Not in this flag room, not even at this school. But I had gone to another school believing that God had chosen me to serve Him, or I had chosen to serve Him in the ministry, and I needed Bible training. I needed help. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to do that, and I didn't even have a message yet that I felt like I could adequately deliver to others. And so, just like you who are here now to be trained and taught and guided and counseled to serve God the rest of your life in ministry, that's where I was 49 years ago. So it's a somewhat melancholy time for me to think back over all those years. And the things we're talking about this morning will reflect not just on my life, but on the life of almost everyone else here who's made that same journey already. In our book of Job, we have the story of a man who suffered. The scriptures in the New Testament refer to the patience or perseverance of Job. And yet, by and large, we give Job pretty short shrift in our teaching programs. Fortunately, you will have a course, those of you who are in the 2-year program, on wisdom literature, and Job will be a significant part of that study. And well, it should be. I sometimes ask myself the question when I'm reading the scriptures, why does God give so much attention to this thing? Or why does He not give more attention to this thing over here? And perhaps you haven't ever thought about it before, but Job, this book that we may not have ever even read before, has 42 chapters in it. It's one of the larger books in the Bible. Something is going on here that God felt like was important enough that even in how economical God is with things, He said, I need to give more attention to this than many other things that He does in the Scripture. And hopefully we'll see a little bit of what that is this morning. First, let's meet our man, Job. The first 3 verses of Job tells us about this man. It says, in the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. Job is fairly short in historical connections and references for us to know exactly where and when this man lived, but it seemed like that he probably lived outside of what we would call the land of Israel. Uz is identified somewhere else in Scripture as actually being either near or a part of Edom, the land to the south of Israel, and so perhaps that's where he's from. The time frame seems to be before the days of Moses. He would be more, not necessarily an exact contemporary, but live in that period of time in general that Abraham lived in the patriarchal age. But one more thing that really stands out about him is he seems not to be Jewish. Well, first of all, if he's contemporary or even before Abraham, he couldn't be a descendant of Abraham anyway. but he doesn't seem to be of that particular lineage or line. And yet here is this man who is a man of God. We might be reminded of another man in the Old Testament like that by the name of Melchizedek. And perhaps in some ways, Job is like him. This man is an upright man, both in his relationships with others, but also in his relationship with God. In fact, it says here right at the beginning that he was blameless. This is, in other contexts, is translated by the word integrity. He is a man of integrity. And I believe that word appears 7 times in the book of Job to describe this man. And the word integrity to the Hebrews meant someone who was authentic. What you saw on the outside is what that person was like on the inside. Job had integrity. He was blameless. So here's the man, but something happens. In verse 6 it says, on one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord. The scene shifts from earth to heaven. And the Satan also came with him. Now, Satan, or the Satan, and again, no Hebrew scholar, not even a Hebrew student, but the Satan was a word that meant the enemy, the accuser. And so this being shows up that we still recognize today by the name Satan, but he's actually an enemy. He's one who is going to be an accuser, and we will see him fulfill that description in what happens here. And the Satan also came with them, and the Lord said to the Satan, where have you come from? And the Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. Then the Lord said to the Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And the Satan replied, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. But the Lord said to the Satan, very well then, everything he has is in your hands, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. So we meet the man, and then we meet the challenge, the first challenge. This being called Satan, or the Satan, goes out, and in a very short period of time, Job loses everything that measured his wealth and prosperity. Some of his animals are stolen by raiders, others are destroyed in a great natural calamity. And even as servants are coming to him from those distant places where those animals were to tell him what has happened and how everything has been lost, it's almost faster than, I'm sure, than Job can even assimilate what he's hearing. And then one last servant comes and says, all 10 of your children have been killed in a natural disaster. And I'm the only one left alive to come tell you. And so what was Job's response? In verse 20 of chapter 1, at this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked will I depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. But then there's a second challenge. On another day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and the Satan also came with them to present himself before him. And the Lord said to the Satan, where have you come from? And Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. Then the Lord said to the Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. Skin for skin, the Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life. But stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. And his wife said to him, are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. But he replied, you are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. And then follows from this 39 chapters of a discussion and argumentation between Job and three very wise friends of his who show up to comfort him and to somehow try to explain to him that it's all his fault that this has happened to him, even though he was a man of integrity. At the very end, Job is restored. But what's the point of the book of Job? A lot of people have struggled with that, and I struggle with that. It seems to me that it's not why do people suffer. That's not the subject being discussed in this book. Nor is it even why do God's people suffer. But instead, it is, will a person continue to honor and worship God when God does not deliver him from unexplained suffering? I know that sounds like a longer statement there. Or maybe in other ways, why fundamentally does a man or a woman God worship and serve God? Down at the very root of it. Is it because God gives them everything they want and need? If that's so, then what do they do when God doesn't give them everything they want and need? And more than that, when God allows everything they love and everything they cherish and everything that makes life good and comfortable for them, God lets that all be taken away from them. Why will they still worship and serve Him? That's the question of Job. As Job seemingly inexplicable, to him at least, suffering continues because it's not the result of sin on his part. He's not being punished for his sin. He's not even suffering the consequences of his sin. There seems to be no explanation from Job's standpoint of why this has all happened to him. You have to understand that while that challenge or two challenges took place in heaven by the Satan to God, Job is not privy to that. He doesn't know that's happened. He doesn't understand that. That's for the inspired writer later to tell us that's what's going on. But for Job and for his three friends, he doesn't know about that. He doesn't know about that challenge that took place in heaven. He also does not know of God's confidence that Job will maintain his integrity. And he does not fully understand what's God's purposes in allowing this to take place, even as God is the ruler over all His creation. So what does Job's story have to do with us? Many, probably all, of the men and women who are here with you today, preparing you for a lifetime of ministry and service to God. These men and women can testify that God will not always answer every prayer you ask. And God will not always give you what you think you should have. And many things will come into your life during your service to Him between now and that day when you enter into eternity. Many things will enter into your life that will be classified as suffering. And you'll cry out to God and say, why? What did I do? What could I have done differently? Why is my heart and my life so burdened with these things when all I have done is committed to serve Him with all my heart? Does He not love me? Does He not care for me? Does He not understand? And often you won't get an answer that'll be satisfactory to you. One commentator, I believe it's Christopher Ash, in the commentary on Job in the Preach the Word commentary series, talks about the difference between being in an armchair and being in a wheelchair and how you view things. From an armchair, you can discuss things conceptually, theoretically. But when you're in the wheelchair, you're discussing what's really happened to you. Job was in the wheelchair. When he had all those discussions with his friends and then with God, and it does say that he contended with God, he questioned God, he asked God, he even argued with God about why this happened. And that is said, I believe, 8 times in the book, that he contended with God. He didn't always get answers that satisfied. And yet, as I think about these men and women who are here to serve you, to help you to serve, I know only just a very few of the things some of them have endured in their life. I know some right now are battling cancer. You may not know that. That makes no difference whether you do or not. And probably they ask God why. I know that some of our men and women who are part of our faculty and staff here have suddenly lost their mate or a child or even children. It ripped their heart out. And there was no explanation. I mean, yeah, you knew the specifics. Maybe it was cancer. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was something else that took their life. So they know what took their life, but they don't know why. Why did God allow that when all they have done is committed their life to serve Him? Most of them have not enjoyed a lifetime of financial security, similar to others around them that they perhaps graduate from high school and or college with. They've struggled to make ends meet and even now have to regularly hit the road and approach supporters to continue that support so they can be here. They don't have, all those camels and sheep and other animals like Job did, but that got taken away. Many of them have experienced in their ministry times when they were unjustly accused of things and their motives questioned, even though their motives were simply to please God and serve His people. They've probably been dismissed from service in their ministries at various places, as if somehow they were guilty of wrong when the reasons were really not their fault at all. Is it possible that God is most often more concerned about how we endure and are faithful when we suffer than He is concerned about how successful we are in our ministry? Why do we serve God? You've come here to this place to be trained, to be taught, to be prepared to serve God. But if you came and thought that you were going to go into ministry because God was going to bless you with everything you wanted, and that the brethren were going to give you everything you needed, and would always treat you the way you ought to be treated, and that your life from now until the end of it is going to be one without suffering, without pain, without grief, without unbearable heaviness of heart at times. If you've thought that, you will not endure. You see, for Job, this man of integrity, who couldn't always get the answers he wanted from God about why, God, have you allowed all these things to come upon me? From beginning to end, Job was the same on the inside as he appeared to be on the outside. He worshiped and served God, not because of what God was going to give him, nor even because of what God had given him. He worshiped and served God for just one reason: because God was God, and God is due all of our love and all of our honor and all of our worship, whether He always makes sure we get what we think we ought to have or not. That's a hard lesson to keep learning. I know that in my life. I'm not here to share with you what's happened in my life over the years. It's just a light and momentary thing as compared to many others. But nevertheless, there have been times at night I've laid on my pillow at night and say, why, God? Why? And I haven't always heard an answer. But I serve Him wholeheartedly, nevertheless. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul, speaking of himself and others, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, starting in verse 16, he says, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." You might think, Paul, what do you mean light and momentary troubles? I mean, when you think about some of the things Paul had endured, even by the time he was writing to the Corinthians here: imprisonment, shipwrecks, beatings, whippings, stonings, rejections, not having enough to live on, and many times having to actually stop doing ministry so he could work with his own hands, not only to meet his own needs, but the needs of the other brothers that were working along with him, who would also starve or do without if someone didn't provide. And yet it said, as compared to what God still has prepared for us, these are light and momentary troubles. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And the other great apostle, Peter, says in 1 Peter chapter 1, he says in verse 6 beginning, "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may be proved genuine and may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." It may well be that right now in heaven, a conversation is going on, and your name is going to be mentioned. And it's the Lord Himself who is saying right now to Satan, Have you considered my servant in your name? What will your integrity be like? Thank you.